This is a comparison that a lot of people have asked for because the Hisense U8G produced favorable results. So I wanted to come back and show you guys basically what it looks like when you have two calibrated displays, a calibrated U7G and a calibrated Sony OLED, to show you how close or how far either one are from one another. So long story short, without wasting any of your time, the Hisense U7G does lose to the Sony A8G. So smack the like on this video for just getting to the point, not drawing it out. Now there are things that Hisense does better than Sony, and that's what we're going to be talking about to round it out and really give you guys an idea as to where these TVs sit as far as performance. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is the brightness. The brightness is going to be substantially better for somebody in a brighter environment. As you guys can clearly see, I'm in a darker environment so that we don't have as much glare or interference with the picture quality you can see on camera. But essentially, if you're in a brighter room, you are going to see a lot of that kind of disappear when you, again, start comparing TVs, especially since the brightness of the Hisense U7G is significantly brighter than the Sony A8G. But to the A8G's defense, quite obviously, it has so much more depth. Also, the A8G is a 65-inch, just like the Hisense U7G, but what you're seeing right now is depth perception, and it's happening because of the angle in which I'm positioned. I don't have a way of positioning it in such a way where I can get both of these TVs in frame, so I do apologize for that. Unfortunately, that's just one of the limitations we're going to have to rock with right now. But that being said, you can at least see an idea of the quality to the right on the Sony to the right. So yeah, that's just what I'll say there. Okay, so the skin tones also look really good on both TVs. I would give the edge to Hisense here simply because Sony is a bit dark by comparison. Of course, that's just, you know, the nature of OLED. Sometimes some things get a little darker than others. Okay then, so we're going to talk about the differences between OLED and, you know, ULED, quantum dot technology coming out of Hisense here. And I think the biggest difference that you're going to notice is that for something like the U7G, the reason you'd want to step up into the U8 is because you're not going to get the same level of black levels, which in turn kind of take away from the depth a little bit. And that can be seen in things like the isolation, as we see over here. You're noticing there's not as much bokeh on this image on the Hisense U7G as you have on the Sony to the right. And these are little nitpicking, pixel peeping things that normal people don't do and won't notice. But I'm pointing them out to try to show you something. It's essentially like there's a lot of haze right now on the left on the Hisense U7G compared to the OLED. That's the biggest reason why people like OLED so much, is because you remove all of this haze from the background needing to be lit. Because what essentially is happening here is the TV is basically trying to figure out what should be bright. And so it says, I need Aquaman bright, I need that blue bright, I need that red bright. We need to make sure that you can see dynamic range in the gray, or in the like lower gray portion of the IRE. It's trying to find everything that you would want to perceive. Where on OLED is just banging out and it's like, I can make that darker, I can make that darker, all the little details in there darker because of pixel level illumination. So the benefits are not going to be eliminated just because you have a brighter television. And again, this isn't a dig on Hisense, this is just explaining the technology. I will say though that like when you get to scenes like this and Aquaman, you're gonna have fun either way because the brightness kicking out is absolutely wonderful, and it's something that can be felt as a true benefit. Now, again, I can open up my ISO a little bit more to show the dynamic range that actually exists on the Sony, but if I do that, I'll clip out the Hisense and I'll show you what that looks like now. If I were to do that, see now the Sony is showing more of its dynamic range, but Hisense is looking way blown out by comparison, which is just not what it looks like. So I'm going to put it back to like normal where we can kind of see everything. So, and that's the other part of this that gets kind of hard because you're dealing with two levels of luminosity. And when that's the case, one's going to be so much brighter than the other that it's going to be very difficult to kind of nail in. But what I want to draw your attention to now in this particular scene is the level of, again, immersion and depth that you're getting on OLED to the right versus the Hisense U7G. Again, it's not a dig on Hisense saying that anything's wrong with Hisense, but a lot of people that were asking for this comparison have to understand why it's such an unfair comparison to do. And that's just simply because when you compare a TV that's a mid-range at this point, which was never intended to go up against an OLED, you're going to start seeing absolutely decimating results, especially when it's been calibrated by yours truly. So just kind of keep that in mind. Normal people, also an important note here, are not going to be seeing the level of picture quality I have on either of these TVs because I have calibrated both of them. So whatever results you're seeing here, just keep in mind I've professionally adjusted these myself as an expert, but most people aren't experts, and that's going to have to play a role into what you're seeing. Now, that being said, I'm pretty sure you can appreciate seeing what these TVs are capable of versus just whipping it out of the box and saying, hey, this is going to be what it's going to be, right? So essentially, long story short, no matter what you look at scene to scene, the Hisense U7G is going to be brighter. In some scenarios, you can have more color volume, so you can see a little bit more there. But ultimately speaking, the Sony does deliver with the detail. As I was saying, with the brightness, as you're clearly seeing it here, the Sony A8G has no hope of competing with this level of brightness. And for many, this is where something like the Hisense U7G becomes very appealing. There's zero risk of burn-in, and in the brightest scenes in movies where it matters, like in this, where there's a lot of luminosity going on, you want to be able to see that kind of stuff. Well, OLED is just not that bright to be able to compete with something that's over 1,000 nits like you have here on the Hisense U7G. And I think, again, with that ABL kicking in over time and dimming down the image, that really becomes a deterrent to a lot of people. So even though it's not all rainbows and butterflies, there are still things to kind of keep in mind here. Another thing I want to point your attention to is that when we talk about the algorithms of full array local dimming TVs, some types of contrast perform wonderfully, and this is a perfect example. So when something's mostly bright on the screen, as you can clearly see, all of these brighter elements in the background, that kind of thing gets a almost bioluminescent glow to it and a kick from having that extra overhead with peak brightness. And then it does things like hone in on the dark parts of the armor and the uniform and darken that stuff down really well. Is it as dark as it is on OLED? No. Are the colors as accurate as OLED? No. But at the same point in time, you're getting a level of luminosity and contrast that also kind of isn't there on OLED in some aspects. So again, just kind of highlighting both the pros and the cons of the technology here. And also another benefit is going to be shadow detail. You're going to notice no matter what scene you put up, there is going to always be a ton more shadow detail in the face on something like a full array local dimming television than what exists on OLED, because OLED, again, finding all the craters in a face, darkening that detail where it's not happening like that with pixel level illumination on a full array TV. So again, things to think about as we are comparing TVs, and ultimately you have to decide what's best for you. Again, I know the OLED is looking overly dim and crushed out right now, but as I stated earlier on, if we open up our ISO, all we're going to do is just make the OLED look better, and then we're going to crush out the Hisense, which is not actually what it looks like, which would be totally unfair. But essentially, that's the image on the OLED that I actually have. I'm telling you, it is absolutely breathtaking. Just looking at it in person, it's really good, especially on this scene. But my point being is that no matter which way you go, even though there is one that's definitely a winner, it's still a good experience on both types of technology. You just, again, have to be very aware of those differences in what you're trying to see. And so hopefully by putting all this out there, it kind of helps you guys see what you're looking for, and you can kind of gauge what type of TV is better for you. Now, if you have questions down in the comment section below, I'd love to answer any questions you may have. But essentially, this is pretty much the video. I mean, it's basically like when you get to bright scenes like this, expect the U7G to outperform OLED basically every day of the week as far as the luminosity and the color volume and things like that. But in the darker scenes, expect it to struggle. And ultimately, that's why the OLED takes the cake, because even though it's not as bright, it does have more depth and dimensionality and color accuracy, and that's where it becomes like Sony does win this one. But even still, as you can clearly see here, the Hisense U7G is performing admirably. That being said, I want to thank you guys so much for watching, the #1 brand in honesty, and until the next video, I'll see you guys later.